Dr. Ken Wink here with UT Tyler, our first political expert of the night, to talk more about this. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Wink.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so you've been closely tracking the Texas Senate and the presidential races through your polling at UT Tyler. What are some of those key trends or shifts that you've observed in Texas voters this election season?
Well, about 2 weeks ago, we had Trump up by 5 and Cruz up by 2. The Cruz race looked very, very close. With a little over half the votes in, it's not quite as close as we thought it would be. And if they've already called it for Trump and Cruz is ahead by 5 points or so, that's probably a very good sign for Cruz.
And Dr. Wink, there's a staggering new number of voters who have moved into the state. So how does that come into play with these races?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. We know historically people moving to the state back in the 1980s contributed to the Republican realignment in the state. But I think there's probably a more even split among recent immigrants into Texas from other states. Uh, Greg Abbott, a few years ago, said that he thought it was a plus for the Republicans. I'm not so sure, but that's the big question. When people move here from California, do they bring California with them, or do they become Texans?
That's right. Now, shifting things back to the Senate race, we have Allred and incumbent Ted Cruz. Now, as we've seen, the last time Cruz defeated O'Rourke narrowly, and we're kind of expecting the same thing here with Allred as well. But it looks like Allred may possibly, according to experts, have a closer race than Beto O'Rourke did. What is the reason for that? Is it timing? Is it the campaign? We know that Democrats have been donating a lot in support of him this year. What's the reason for that?
Well, I think Colin Allred is a good candidate. He's very viable. He's a likable guy. He's attracted a lot of support around the country in terms of money, as you mentioned. I think Ted Cruz is not quite as popular as Trump in the state, but on the other hand, Cruz has a way of pulling out these close elections. And even though we had this election pretty close, Cruz is doing better than I thought he would. And, there's still quite a lot of votes to count, but he is doing rather well tonight.
Do you have any kind of surprise prediction in any of the races here at the Lone Star State?
I don't think so. Another one I am interested in is the U.S. House district down in, I think it's House District 15, which is I think it's the Monica de la Cruz district. That is the one House district that is very, very close. Could go either way. We've got a Republican incumbent who was polling up by about 3 points a month ago. But again, considering the national implications, that's a seat that the Republicans need to keep if they want to keep control of the U.S. House at the national level.
For sure. And speaking of the Republicans, how many of the early voting ones do you think might split their vote when it comes to president or the U.S. Senate race?
Well, I think we do see a little bit of a split. Obviously, Trump is running a little bit higher margins than Cruz is, so people are doing some split ticket voting. Our polling also showed that Trump was more popular among independents and Latinos even than Ted Cruz was. But as I said, Allred is a very solid candidate. We shouldn't be too surprised. But again, I would not be surprised if Cruz pulled it out before the night is over.
And Dr. Wink, we know your expertise is in polling. We've seen on social media, of course, the outcry of how polling and how confident people are in the polling. How confident are you in polling? I know you've been doing this in several elections.
Yeah, I'm fairly confident. I will say it is an interesting thing. I've actually been on the phone myself and talked to people. And, before the days of Trump, it was pretty easy to get people to answer polls. But in the era of Trump, what I would say is that people are more hesitant to answer polls. It is really hard to get people to complete those polls, and you never know if you're disproportionately contacting Democrats or Republicans. So it's a little bit less precise than it was, I would say, 10 years ago even.
Like you mentioned, you were on the phone talking to voters here. Is this just in East Texas where you're doing this polling, or is this across the country?
Well, we're polling in the state of Texas. We're only polling registered voters in the state of Texas, looking at statewide races in Texas, the president's race and the governor's, and I should say the U.S. Senate race this time around.
The state of Texas usually leans towards Republicans. So when you're talking to those voters, when you're polling them, what are they telling you?
Well, I have to say we've started contracting out the polling over the last couple of years, but I learned a lot in the days when we were actually calling on our campus. You just have to get people to answer the phone, and once you're convinced, they are convinced that you're a university, you're not polling for any of the candidates, you're not polling for any of the parties. You can a lot of times get them to finish the poll, but you got to get them to answer the phone in the first place. And as you know, people just don't do that as much anymore. But I found out about a lot about human nature. Some people will tell you more than you want to know. And I have met some really colorful characters in the past talking to people on the phone.
Awesome. Well, we know nationwide the important issues, or some of them would be abortion, reproductive rights, and border control. But it looks like here in Texas, school choice is also a really important issue, and it's kind of seemingly divided the Republican Party. Some Republicans are in favor of school choice, others are opposed to it. Does that have any impact on the races, both here locally with our Republican candidates and also Ted Cruz, because he is in favor of school choice?
Yeah. I don't think so. In a national election, when the presidency is on the line, it's really about national level issues. I think the Republicans in the state legislature will be squabbling over this in the spring for sure. But you know what our polling found is that people really were interested in abortion, and about equally on both sides, by the way, not just reproductive rights, but also concerned about the need for the state regulating abortion. And we found that border security was very important and inflation was very important. Those were the big three the entire time we were polling, which was in, I think, February, June, and October.
And Dr. Wink, we had early voting open up for 2 weeks. We know we had a record turnout, as we've been reporting here at CBS 19. But what does that early turnout say about this race?
Well, you have to figure out who's turning out. It does seem that Republican early voting turnout was heavier this year than it was in 2020. I don't think overall it was heavier, but Republicans, I think learn from 2020, get out there and do the early voting. The Trump people really emphasized that this time. But what you never know till election day is, are you cannibalizing your own voters? That is to say, are you now just having people who would have voted anyway, voting early instead of voting on election day? You don't really know that till the votes are counted. But one thing you do know is when people say they're going to early vote and they actually do it, that vote is in, that vote is counted. When people say, I'm going to vote on election day, they may or may not. So I think Republicans were pretty happy to see those early voting trends in Texas this year.
All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Wink from UT Tyler.
All righty, we appreciate your insight. We'll be right back after a short break.